Good afternoon, everyone. It is Wednesday, September 8th. Forgot the date for a minute, 2021, and it is 3 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which means it is time for Women in Business. And I'm happy to see you all today. Today, we are going to talk about imposter syndrome, which actually stemmed out of a discussion that we had in the Women in Garment Decoration group. I'm going to put that link up just in case you are not aware of the group, because Women in Garment Decoration is a really great gathering of women who talk about all sorts of issues, among them imposter syndrome. And we talk about everything from how to find inventory to how to deal with problems in our lives to any number of issues. We're a great support system for each other. So if you are not a member, please do come and join us on Facebook. It will definitely be worth your time. And imposter syndrome is what we're discussing today. And part of the reason that we're discussing it is because of a conversation that occurred in the Women in Garment Decoration group where one woman won an award and she said, my first reaction was, oh, they got the wrong person. And then she asked the question, why do we do that to ourselves? And why do we always doubt that we're worthy of the awards or the things that we win? And it was a good question. And I thought, well, okay, that's a topic that's worthy of further examination. So since I have this hour here and guests have been a little thin on the ground lately, I figured we could cover that topic. So that's what we're going to do. Let's start with the question that probably should kick this thing off. What is imposter syndrome? And imposter syndrome is basically thinking you're not good enough, thinking you're not worthy, thinking that they do have the wrong person when they give you an award or you get a promotion, worrying that people are going to figure out that you're not qualified or are not talented enough to be doing what you're doing. It's basically the fear that somebody's going to see behind the mask and realize that you're not the person that they think you are, that you're not qualified to be doing what you're doing, that you shouldn't have gotten the award, that you fooled everybody, and no one can see your incompetence or your, cruel misapplication to the various situation. Now, whether this is a mental illness or a neuroticism or whatever it is something that's up for debate. The syndrome was first identified in 1978 by two female researchers. It was thought originally, because the researchers who found it were females and they were doing a study of women, that this was a syndrome that mostly impacted women. Since then, they have realized that men can have imposter syndrome too, but it does very much seem to be a syndrome, if you will, that impacts women. Women are ones who report it most often. Women are the ones who discuss dealing with it most often. There have been various studies at various times that have come up with numbers ranging from 9% to 82% of people who say that they have had imposter syndrome at some time in their lives. So it does affect a lot of people. And really, it's something that's so pervasive that, it's only been since 1978 that we had a name for it. But the thing about it is that I think there are a lot of people that experience it that just don't know what it is that they're dealing with. It's kind of a buzzword too. Every time you have a little bit of doubt about yourself, you say, oh, I'm having imposter syndrome. I mean, I think there's degrees of it too, but it was officially identified in 1978. If you are interested, there is a test that was developed by one of the original doctors who studied and identified and named the syndrome to help you determine if you have imposter syndrome or not. So if you're wondering if you do, and I think it's probably pretty easy to figure out if you do or not, but if you are interested or concerned about that, you can go and take this test and it will tell you. because as you can see, it says IP test and scoring. So you can take the test and then find out how you scored on the scale of, am I an imposter or not? Now, there are discussions about whether this is a real thing. I mean, it has a name now, so obviously it is real on some level, but or whether this is just a bunch of people having normal doubts and being precious about it, so to speak, or being overly dramatic about it, so to speak. And I think this is an actual thing. I think there are enough people who have issues. There is also discussion, or has been discussion recently, that I'll talk about a little later, about the fact that there are systemic factors in workplaces and in the gender biases that exist that can be causing imposter syndrome too. And that's something that I thought was interesting that I hadn't really realized. So I think that's interesting. Cindy King says, good afternoon again. She watched my Applicant Getaway live earlier, and I have never heard of this. You're one of the few, Cindy. I think you're lucky that you have never heard of this. It's talked about a lot, and it's blamed for a lot of things that maybe it shouldn't be. But at its basic core, what it really is you have a doubt about yourself. You're concerned in some way about your competence, about people recognizing that you're not competent, about your worthiness for an award or promotion or some recognition, whatever it is. So it's basically just something that gets in your way a lot, and that's why it's a problem. Now, one of the things that I didn't know until I started reading about this is that there are really different types of imposter syndrome, which is my next topic. And I was not aware of this. I thought imposter syndrome was imposter syndrome. But there actually are different variations or flavors of imposter syndrome. And I recognized, I'm sad to say, a few of these as something that I have done or have over my time on this earth. So apparently I am not immune. Not that I really thought I was, but I was hoping. So the first type of imposter syndrome is the perfectionist syndrome, which is I can't do anything unless I'm perfect at it. I can't be shown to be learning. I can't be shown to be less than perfect at something. If I'm going to play an instrument, I'm not going to ever play in public until you can see it perfectly. If I do a project, it's going to be the most meticulous, perfectly oriented project that ever was. Perfectionism, we all know, is a problem and a danger for a lot of people, because perfectionism keeps you from doing things because you think it has to be meticulous and perfect, and you don't want to have any mistakes or anybody see anything that reflects poorly or badly or looks like you didn't give 150 million%. So perfectionism is one type of imposter syndrome. The experts is another type of imposter syndrome, which is you will not speak on a topic, you will not take on a task unless you know everything there is to know about it. You have to research, you have to be able to answer every question, you have to be able to supply every piece of information. And if you feel that you can't do that, then you won't speak up. You won't ask questions to learn more. You won't contribute an idea. You're so locked into, I have to be the informational guru on this topic or this task that we're doing, that if you can't cover every aspect of it, if you don't feel that you're well versed in every minute detail of everything, if you can't be the expert, if you can't be the one that everybody else looks to for information or for help, then you're not going to do it, is basically how that works. So again, it's something that gets in your way because you're so focused on being hyper prepared, because you have to spend so much prep time to get to the point where you feel comfortable actually participating in whatever it is. You never get to the point where you participate because you're spending so much time ramping up. And honestly, how many projects or discussions or things do you know that give you that much prep time? It just doesn't happen. So it gets in your way. Another type of imposter syndrome that I thought was interesting was what they call the natural genius imposter syndrome. And this is the person who, on most occasions or in certain disciplines, is just naturally talented. So they don't really have to work at it. So when they encounter something that they do have to work at to be good at, or they do have to work at to learn, they get scared and they either opt out of doing it because they can't learn it right away, or they feel bad or negative about themselves because they can't learn it right away. And this is something that I think is really interesting, because if you have somebody who is naturally good or naturally fast or adept at something, and you put them in a situation where they're not allowed to play to their strengths, it's very disorienting and it's very uncomfortable. And I say this because I had this duality when I was in school. I was very good at anything that had to do with words. So reading, writing, anything like that. I was the champ, man. I was good. You put me in a math situation, and I can do math. I'm not horrible at it. I'm just not naturally talented at it. I have to think about it. I have to work at it. But back then, I wasn't mature enough to realize that things you have to think about and work at can be valuable. So I was just, I don't like it. I don't want to do it. And I actually have in one of my yearbooks from, I think it was high school, there actually was a math teacher who wrote, do math more, read books less, because I would have a book on my lap under my desk and I would read instead of paying attention to the class, because at that point I was just like, well, I didn't get this right out of the box, so I'm not going to deal with it anymore. I'm not interested. So that's really sad. And I think that's another thing that can get in your way. If you are used to kind of sailing and not working that hard and doing well, when you encounter something that you have to work harder at and your ego or your self-worth is posited on being naturally good at things, then you'll turn away from something that you have to work at, which is sad, because working at things is one of the valuable parts of life. And working at things and learning and accomplishing them and getting better is also a way that you grow self-esteem. So the natural genius, I have to say, I don't claim I don't like that title really. Naturally talented, maybe, I don't know. But I don't claim to be a genius by any stretch of the imagination, but I identified with that one, I have to say. And I identify with this next one too, which is what they call the soloist. The soloist thinks they have to accomplish everything without asking for help from anyone. They are fiercely independent and they're going to do everything on their own, and they have to be perfect at it. And they don't want anybody around to see if they don't do things well. So they'll never ask for help and they'll never admit they need help, because they have a lot invested in the self-image of being able to do things on their own. They feel like that's important. They feel like there's a benefit that comes from that. So they have a huge investment in being a soloist or a lone wolf, in looking like they can do everything on their own. So I'll admit I have part of this too. I tend to be one of those people who is very independent and doesn't like to ask for help. I'm not good at it. I wish that I were, but I'm not. So Liz Boswell says, ouch, feeling this one. I like that. I'm glad to know misery loves company, I guess. I'm glad to know I'm not the only one. And then the last type of imposter syndrome that they have identified is the superwoman or superman, which is, I'm going to be the perfect parent, the perfect spouse, the perfect employee, the perfect committee member, the perfect church member, I'm going to be perfect in every area. I'm going to be so perfect that you're all just going to be in awe of my perfection. And you will never see a flaw, and you will never see that I'm in the bathroom crying at 2 a.m. because I can't deal with all the stress of trying to be so perfect all the time. And it's a sad thing. It really is, because if you're trying to be superwoman or superman, you're so caught up in trying to be perfect in every area, in trying to outwork everybody else, in trying to do everything perfectly, that you can't enjoy the fruits of anything that you've done because you're so concerned that you're going to let a ball drop somewhere and someone's not going to get what they need, or someone's going to recognize that you can't do everything. And that's like a fate worse than death. So all of these types of imposter syndrome, if you look at them, it's really about putting pressure on yourself on some level to perform at a level that's not realistic and probably isn't achievable, honestly. But the fear comes from you have these impossibly high expectations of what you think you can get to or what you want to be. And then the fear comes from somebody figuring out that you can't meet those expectations, even though probably nobody else around you is having those same expectations. So there's a lot to unpack here. I mean, in the types of imposter syndrome, in why we feel this way, which is the next thing I want to talk about. But I want to focus for a minute on, let's look at these types, because you've got perfectionists, experts, the naturally talented, which I'm going to say instead of natural genius because I just don't like that one, the soloists, and the superwomen. And really, they're all about, I'm going to do things better than everybody else. I'm going to do things that benefit everybody else. If I can't do things at the top of my game, I'm not going to do them at all. And I'm not going to ever admit that I can't do it on my own or that I can't be perfect. So there's a lot of fear in all of that. There's a lot of fear in people are going to find out that I can't do these things. People are going to find out that I'm not naturally talented. People are going to find out that I need help, that I'm vulnerable. And so there's a lot of fear that goes with imposter syndrome. And, you know, we toss it off as, oh, haha, imposter syndrome. But it really can be an impediment. It really can keep you from trying new things, or from going after that job, or from rejoicing or celebrating your own accomplishments because you feel like you should have done more, you should have done better, you were capable of more, whatever it is. Or honestly, they picked the wrong person, and if they only knew what I really was, they wouldn't be celebrating me, which is sad, I think. So there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of self-doubt. There's a lot of lack of self-confidence in imposter syndrome. And I don't think it's any coincidence that it was discovered in a study of women, because there's also a lot of, which we will talk about a little later, gender bias and systemic factors, which is harder to say than you would think, that come into play when you talk about imposter syndrome. In other words, imposter syndrome a lot of times is kind of framed as, well, women have it and they need to get over it. So, you know, recite affirmations in the mirror or keep a list of your accomplishments, whatever. I don't think imposter syndrome is all self-developed. I think some of it is imposed upon us by the system. I don't like saying that word, but I think it's true. By the way that things are structured, and we'll talk about that a little later. And I also will give you a link to an article that I think addresses it really well. But for now, let's focus on the types of imposter syndrome. Like I said, perfectionist, experts, naturally talented, soloists, and superwomen, and look at how much pressure that puts, how much pressure all of those different iterations of the syndrome can put on women. I mean, you know, it's hard enough some days just getting out of bed and dealing with life. And then if you have to be perfect at it, and perfect in every area, perfectly coiffed, the perfect employee, the perfect parent, the perfect spouse, the perfect daughter, friend, cousin, aunt, whatever it is, you have to be the best in class at that. And then you're also secretly worrying that everybody's going to figure out that you aren't best in class. So the next question is, why do people experience imposter syndrome? And there are a bunch of different answers to this. One answer could be the way that you were brought up. If you were brought up where nothing but the best was acceptable, if you were brought up in the shadow of siblings who always outshone you somehow, or who were naturally gifted and could do things much easier than you could have it. If you were brought up in a family where you were constantly denigrated or told that you weren't worth anything, or that you couldn't do things, or you weren't good at things, you can definitely have confidence issues, and that can lead to imposter syndrome. If you experienced situations, I guess I want to say, where you thought that you were doing well and then it turned out that you weren't, or you thought that everybody was admiring you and they really weren't. If you were teased or bullied in high school or in your life in general, those things can lead to imposter syndrome. And obviously, if you have perfectionism, if you're taught that asking for help is a bad thing, if you're taught that your role in life is to caretake for everybody else, all of these things can cause you to experience imposter syndrome. And sometimes, as I said before, gender bias and racism can cause you to experience imposter syndrome. There's a lot of messages out there that can tell us that we're not good enough, that we don't belong, that we're not supposed to be where we are, that we shouldn't be doing what we're doing. If you want to read a really good article on how gender bias and racism can impact imposter syndrome, there's a really good article from the Harvard Business Review called "Stop Telling Women They Have Imposter Syndrome," which basically says it ain't imposter syndrome if it's true, which means that if you are existing in a systemic workplace where people of color and women are treated as second-class citizens, where you're constantly told in subtle ways that you don't belong, then you don't really have imposter syndrome. You're just reacting to the situation that's around you. So this is a really good article, but there have been studies done that do show that imposter syndrome has kind of become the hysteria of the 21st century, which is hysteria was what they labeled any kind of upset in women in the 19th century. If you had any kind of postpartum depression, if you were just pissed off about something, if you had anxiety or depression or anything, they called it hysteria, and they would kind of discount it, or in worst case scenario, you'd get sent to a mental institution and be institutionalized or locked away in a room somewhere, the crazy aunt in the attic or whatever it was. And hysteria in the 19th century is basically kind of what imposter syndrome has become in the 21st century, which is imposter syndrome is used as a way to kind of deny or discount factors that may be causing women to have feelings of doubt or insecurity, or to have self-esteem issues. So instead of addressing the systemic problems that are causing these issues, you just say, oh, it's imposter syndrome, say some affirmations and read this book and get over it. Instead of changing the system and looking at the root causes and the systemic causes, you just say, well, it's up to you. It's your problem. And that's obviously a seductive option. If instead of having to change the system, instead of having to look at the cultural factors that are causing issues, we just go, it's your problem, you need to fix it, then we don't have to deal with it. But gender bias does cause imposter syndrome. If you are in a place where you're constantly told that people like you shouldn't be there, if you're in a place where you're told that you're the token, If you're in a place where you're consistently told that women aren't good at this kind of thing, or women don't usually do this job, or, whatever it is, then you over time can come to believe that you really don't belong in that position, that you really shouldn't be there, that somehow by a fluke of luck you have arrived, but you shouldn't necessarily be there, which is a really sad thing when you think about it, and is a really annoying, angering, maddening. I'm not really sure what word I want to use. Any of those kind of comment on the fact that we do have gender bias, we do have racism. These things exist. We don't want to admit that they do, but they do. And part of dealing with these things is talking about them instead of saying, you have imposter syndrome and you need to fix it. We need to look at the root causes behind it. How are we raising girls? What are we telling them? What messages are they getting? What's happening for people of color? All that kind of stuff. And if you look at it, you can see where there are a lot of messages out there that are telling women that they have to be superwomen, that are telling people of color that maybe they don't belong in this place or in this job. And especially if you don't see role models that are doing the kind of behavior that you want to do, it makes it that much tougher. And so there's a lot of things that you need to really look at. And this is a much bigger topic than I can cover in the hour that I have, or that I can adequately cover, honestly, because I'm not a researcher or an educator in this topic. But I would recommend, I'm going to put it up again as a place to start. This article in the Harvard Business Review is really, really helpful and interesting. And it was something, honestly, that I had not really thought about. I had always assumed that imposter syndrome was something that was kind of like, I won't say a mental illness because I don't think that's accurate, but that it was something that was kind of self-generated. And as I read about it more, I realized that, okay, there are systemic and cultural things that play into this. So I thought that was kind of interesting, and I did want to throw that out there, that imposter syndrome isn't necessarily all in your head. So that's something that you really need to be aware of and pay attention to. And my internet connection is being a little unstable. It looks like we might have a storm coming through. So I'm sorry if I'm being a little glitchy. I'm going to keep going until it tells me that we're gone entirely, but it seems to be behaving better at the moment. Things happen. It's been that kind of day. So if you are dealing with imposter syndrome, which a lot of people do, the question becomes, what do you do about it? How do you deal with it? Now, there are a few things that you can do, and a few things that, I mean, obviously, if you do feel like you're dealing with, systemic factors or cultural factors, then the way to get around those is to try to address them and correct them, which I understand that's very easy to say, and it's a very kind of glib way to say, take 300 years of racism and oppression and fix them. And I get that. It's not going to be a fast thing. So leaving aside what is going to take some time to fix, we can talk about a few other things that you can do. The first thing that you can do is learn to reframe your thoughts. And this means examine why you think what you think, and learn to rephrase and reframe, which are two different things. Rephrase is when you get an award and your first instinct is to say, wow, they got the wrong person, or why did I get that? Reframe the thought or rephrase the thought and say, why not me? Or here's my accomplishments, I deserve this. And a lot of people, especially a lot of women, have an issue with doing that because they feel that it's egotistical that they're being braggarts if they do that. And the thing is, recognizing your own accomplishments and taking pride in them is not bragging, and it's not being egotistical. Egotistical is thinking that everything revolves around you and that whatever you do, regardless of the quality, is amazing. That's not what you're doing. You're looking at a specific accomplishment and saying, yes, I am worthy of this. I deserve this. I am qualified to receive this award, this promotion, this raise, whatever it is. So it's really looking at, and if you are, say, you're a soloist and you think that asking for help is the wrong thing to do, learn to reframe the equation and realize that if you're trying to do everything on your own and you're working in a team situation, you're leaving your team members out. You're neglecting skills and talents and knowledge that they may have that you don't. And you may even be holding the project back because you're so unwilling to admit that you can't do everything or know everything. So you need to look at the situation and look at it from all sides and not necessarily from your own standpoint, because your standpoint is going to be protecting yourself somewhat. You're concerned that people don't know that you can't do something. You're concerned that people aren't aware that you're not worthy of whatever award or promotion or whatever it is that you've won. And instead of focusing on people knowing that you're not worthy, you need to focus on what's going to allow me to do the best job in this situation. What's going to allow me to be of the most benefit to my team, to my company, to whomever I'm working with. And then if that means you have to admit that, hey, maybe I'm not the best one to do this, or hey, I really don't know everything I need to know to do this well, you can do that. It's more vulnerable, I'll admit it. And it's a little scary because especially if you have a lot invested in being the expert or being the natural genius or being the one who always does things perfectly, then it's very vulnerable to say, I can't do this, or I don't know how to do this, or I need help to do this. And trust me, the vulnerability of asking for help, I'm an expert on that because I don't do it. That's how vulnerable it makes me feel. I'm terrified of it. So I tend to be independent to probably a suicidal degree at times because I have a lot invested in being the person that other people come to. I don't want to be the person that's asking for help. It's a quirk of my upbringing and a quirk of my personality. So I need to learn to reframe asking for help and not look at it as vulnerability, not look at it as admitting that I couldn't do something or that I'm not good enough, but look at it as I trust my fellow human beings enough to admit that I need help and trust that I'm going to get it. That's just the basic reframing of the situation. So if you're dealing with imposter syndrome, that's one of the things you can do is learn to reframe how you're thinking about the situation and how you're thinking about yourself. Because if you turn, say, let's pick my own little bugaboo, if you turn asking for help from I'm being vulnerable and I'm admitting that I'm less than because I don't know something, to I'm trusting other people to help me and I'm giving them the opportunity to share their knowledge, it's a much more comfortable situation. So that's really something to look at is how are you thinking about the situation and how can you reframe it in a more positive way? And that can definitely help. And also reframe what you say. You know, as happened in the group when we were talking about the award that this one person won. And she said her first instinct was to say, why did I get this? They have the wrong girl. And I thought, you need to reframe that. The message should be, why shouldn't I get this? I'm awesome. Look at what I've done, and take pride in it. So reframing how you're thinking about yourself can also be a good thing. And realize that the messages that were given to you were not always, when you were growing up, from school, from the culture, from your parents, from your friends, from your relatives, from whoever, may not have been benevolent messages. Not everybody around us wants to build us up. Not everybody around us is going to be kind to us. And sometimes people can, genuinely thinking they're doing the right thing, cause harm. So you need to be aware of that too, that the messages that you got that told you that maybe you weren't all that maybe you weren't worthy, also may not have been true. That the people who told you those things could have been operating out of their own pain or hurt or fear or imposter syndrome. So that's something to look at too. It's a lot of questioning. It's a lot of looking at what you're thinking and what you think about yourself and wondering if it's true. This is interesting. Liz says, I'm a giving person, so taking pride sounds wrong, even when it's right. I get that, Liz. I get that. And I see where you're going with that, but at the same time, how maybe not taking pride, maybe having pride in yourself and what you do. I think there is something about the language that sometimes can be problematic, and I get that. But I also think that we have to have a healthy self-esteem, because that allows us to, paradoxically, if your self-esteem is healthy enough, it allows you to admit you need help. It allows you to admit you don't know everything. It allows you to say, maybe I'm not the right person for this particular thing, but let me recommend somebody else. But at the same time, if you have a healthy self-esteem, you also can have pride in your accomplishments. You can own what you do and do well. You can own when you get an award and you can feel worthy of that. You can own when you fall in love or get a promotion or are recognized for something, or somebody tells you you do a good job on something. There's nothing wrong with being complimented and just saying thank you, instead of saying thank you, but here's the 5 things I didn't do properly. Or if you really knew me, you would realize that's not true, or I'm not all that. It's a tough thing, because the knee-jerk reaction, I think, especially for women a lot of the time, is to say, oh, well, if you really knew what I was like. Or if somebody says, hey, you're great at playing the flute, you say, oh, yeah, but you should see my house. It's a mess. It's like, why do we do that? Why do we not just say, thank you, I enjoyed playing the flute, I'm glad you liked it. Or thank you, I'm glad you enjoyed my class. Or I'm glad you enjoyed my talk, or whatever it was. But we don't do that a lot of the time. A lot of the time we end up being more derogatory to ourselves, I guess is the word I want to use. And we end up putting ourselves down, or we end up not acknowledging the fact that, yes, we did well. So learn to reframe your thoughts and learn to reframe what you say. Learn to take a compliment and say, thank you, I appreciate that, and leave it at that, and not add on the, but you should see my house, or, oh, but I'm a mess when it comes to baking, or whatever it is, or I can't do math, or whatever it is. That's not helpful, and it's not right, is the simple way to put it, really. It's not right. It's not what we should be doing. We're always, as women, we're taught to build everybody up except ourselves. So I'm going to say to you, build yourself up too. Make sure that you're acknowledging your strengths and your weaknesses. Ooh, I like this from Gusta. Nothing can damage iron, but iron rusts from within. No other human can harm you, but poor self-esteem causes one to rust from within. Yes, I love that. That is perfect. And that is so true. And I think that's true, that poor self-esteem can do more damage than other humans sometimes, because you end up believing all the stuff that your imposter syndrome is telling you. And you end up believing the negative messages about women don't belong in this job, or, people of color don't normally do this job, or they don't become managers, or women don't become managers, or whatever it is. So you need to work on respecting yourself and your talents and valuing yourself and your talents. And trust me, I have had in my life very poor self-esteem. I am slowly learning to like myself. It's still a work in progress, and I'm 52 years old. I like myself probably more now than I ever have, and I'm probably the most authentic me that I've ever been at this point in my life. But it's been a job and it's been work to get here. And I, for a very long time, worried that everybody was going to figure out, and still do sometimes, worry that all this is going to go away and that nobody's going to want to watch my shows anymore because they're going to figure out I'm just a big blowhard and I don't know what I'm talking about. Or nobody's going to want to come to my classes, or nobody's going to want to be in the group I run. I think everybody has those feelings. Some of us just struggle with them maybe a little more than others. I assume, though, given the statistics that I was quoting earlier, that up to 82% of people have had imposter syndrome at some point. Maybe there's less of these people than I think, but I assume there's some people out there who get an award, or who get offered a job and go, damn, I'm great at this, let's do it. But, one can only hope. So if you're also feeling imposter syndrome, share what you feel. If you're worried about how things will appear, if you're concerned that you can't do the job, if you feel unworthy of the award, say it to other people. Because normally they're going to tell you, you're full of shit. You should have gotten that award. You definitely deserve that promotion. You worked really hard. You're good at what you do. And then listen to them. Don't just go, yeah, but. Listen and take it in and look at your history and see what you've actually done. But talking about it is the first step to fixing it. And that's with most issues that we deal with in the mental health and emotional realm. Talking about it makes it better. And it's hard to believe or admit that sometimes, but it's true. So share what you feel. Let people know that you're feeling unworthy, or you're feeling like maybe you can't handle this, because people will give you support and will help you. Another thing, build connections. And speaking as one of the lone wolf soloists, building connections is hard for me. I tend to build connections one way, which is people coming to me for help and advice and support and caretaking. That's kind of how I do it, because that's less vulnerable for me. I'm not depending on anybody else. Everybody's depending on me. I realize this is something that I need to work on. I am fully aware. You remember when I said a little while ago that I'm still a work in progress? This is part of the work that I'm doing, because I have a real hard time depending on other people. I have a real hard time asking for help. And so my connections are real, but I tend to try to have connections where I'm providing the benefits. That's just, I don't know if more comfortable for me is the word that I want to use, but it's kind of, if I ask you for something, it's generally going to be something that I think will benefit you. Like, will you come exhibit at my show? Or will you come on my podcast, or whatever it is? I don't tend to ask for things that will benefit me. It's just how I work. It's just how I work. So building connections is basically a different way of saying build a support system. Build a network of people who are going to tell you when you're full of shit, when you say you don't deserve the award or I don't deserve the promotion. build a network of people who are going to support you when you say, hey, I really feel like this company that I work for isn't giving women opportunities, and who are going to examine the information that you have with you and help you determine if that's accurate or not. Just, find groups or find people in your real world. It can be a combo of the two that you can talk to, that you can run things by, that you can bounce ideas off of, that you can say to them, hey, I feel like X is happening. Can you listen to this and tell me if you think the same? Because honestly, it's difficult sometimes to know if what you're feeling is genuine or if what you're feeling is cultural or systemic, or possibly the result of mental illness or some kind of thing that you can deal with in some way. There's a lot of factors that can go into imposter syndrome. There are a lot of factors that can go into low self-esteem. There are a lot of factors that can go into doubting yourself. And what you need to do is build connections so you have a support system that will support you when you try new things, that will support you when you're feeling like maybe this is something that you're not qualified for or that shouldn't have happened to you. Networks are amazing and support is amazing, and we all need more of it. And we all need to make sure that it's going both ways, that you're being a support and you're receiving support. And if it's only going one way, then you need to look at, if you're always the person who's receiving support, then you need to look at how you can be more of a support to others in your network. If you're always the person that's giving support, you need to look at why you don't feel comfortable being vulnerable and asking for help, because that's something you need to work on, because nobody is an island, or they shouldn't be. You should be able to rely on other people. You should be able to be vulnerable and ask for help. If you can't do that, then you need to work on that, because it's an issue. Another thing you can do to help combat your imposter syndrome, if you're dealing with it, is avoid comparisons. We tend to put ourselves up against other people, particularly in today's world, when there's social media and there's perfect Instagram families, and there's people who perfectly curate every aspect of their lives on social media to make it look like everything is beautiful. And that's very toxic, because the rest of us look at that and think we're falling short. So don't compare yourself to others. You are where you are. They are where they are. They're doing what they're doing. You're doing what you're doing. Your talents are yours. Their talents are theirs. So, and Ghosta has another, I'm loving your comments today. Start by being proud of the product you just delivered. If the customer says, oh, how nice, smile and say nothing more. Do not start with, yes, but I could. They do not know I am very bad at just this, but work on it. I like that. And that's very true. We need to stop the comparisons. We need to stop that. I could have done it better. We need to stop the, but I could have. It doesn't serve us. We need to accept that we're doing the best we can in the moment we're in. And yes, we can keep trying to learn and grow and be better. And this is a good one too. I like this from Brian. Remember, very few people will share an imperfect picture of their work or their family. True. You don't share the days where your 3-year-old had a meltdown in Target. Or if you do, it's on, one of those posts where you're like, here's what I learned from my 3-year-old having a meltdown in Target. You don't share those days. You don't share the days the house is a mess and you haven't showered and it's 4 p.m. You don't do that, because we don't want people to know that about us. We want to be perfectly curated, and we want to look like we know what we're doing. So yeah, avoid comparisons. Don't assume that the perfect Instagram life that somebody's showing you is how their world really works, and that their 3-year-old doesn't throw pasta all over the kitchen, and that they don't sometimes hide in the bathroom and beg for 5 minutes by themselves. Don't assume that. Don't assume the person who looks like they're jet setting and always going and speaking at conferences and being amazing doesn't have the moments where they go, God, I hope this isn't the conference where they figure out that I totally suck and I don't know anything. Because we all have those moments. And there's an argument to be made for the fact that when you're doing a conference, when you're a speaker, when you're an expert in a certain situation, that having a little moment of self-doubt isn't a good thing because it gives you a little extra bit of adrenaline to get you going and get you energized. So I think a little bit of self-doubt can be a positive thing in certain situations. But if you're constantly comparing yourself to others and coming up short, then stop doing that. Because nobody else is you. So whatever you think you're falling short on, the person that you're comparing yourself to is probably looking at you and going, dang, I wish I did that better like this other person. So just don't do it. Stop comparing yourself to people. Where you are is where you are, and it's the best you can do today. If you don't like something, if you're unhappy with something, then you can take steps and you can change it. But that doesn't mean you aren't worthy just as you are today. And that's something that it took me a gazillion years to learn. And I'm 52, so not a gazillion. But it feels like it took me a really long time to learn that because I compared myself and came up short for years. And I have learned over time that I am who I am and I'm good at what I'm good at. And sorry, my nose is itching. And if I'm not good at something, that's okay. I don't have to be good at everything. I have to find the talents I have and use them to benefit as many people as I can. That's what I'm here to do. And I also have to do things I suck at sometimes, just because sometimes it's good to stink at something. Sometimes it's good to have a beginner's mind and try something new and learn something that you didn't know how to do before. There's something to be said for not being good. There's something to be said for screwing up and failing. And we get so worried about, I'm not doing things as well as this person, or this business does X thing better than I do. So, do you still do it well? Do you still do it decently? Then you're doing fine. Don't worry about it. So avoid comparisons. And the last thing is challenge your doubts. If you're concerned, if you're doubting yourself, remember what you've done in the past. List your past accomplishments. Look at how far you've come from where you started. If you don't believe you can do something, you're probably right. But if you look at your past history and see the steps that you took to get to where you are, then the next thing that you're reaching for becomes more probable, becomes more something that you can do. It's really pretty simple. If you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're right. I think Henry Ford said that, but I've always liked that quote. If you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're right. So believe you can. I think that's always the better option. And I'm a little short of an hour today, but I'm kind of at a good stopping place, and my internet is still being a little weird, so I think I'm going to say, okay, we got it in apparently without any major issues. I'm going to be in Fort Worth this weekend at the Impressions Expo in Fort Worth. If any of you are going to be there, please come find me. Come look me up. If you see me, stop and say hi. I know there are plans to do a women in garment decoration get-together of some sort, hopefully. There may be other plans for things that I am not aware of yet. I'm open to invitations to breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or let's have a beer, or just, hey, nice to meet you. I love meeting all the people that I know from the various groups I'm in. So if you're going to be there, please do come and see me. And I really don't know what we'll be doing on the show next week. I'm working on some guests. Hopefully I will line some of those up. That's part of what I'm going to Fort Worth for too. But rest assured, there will be another conversation of some sort next week. Thank you all for being here, and I will see you next Wednesday. Have a good day, everybody.